We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Ryan Lathrum. He is the Global Diversity and Inclusion Director at Spin. Ryan, it's so good to see you. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly to answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, first, thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Ryan. My pronouns are he, him, his. Um, I actually think about this all the time because this is not the career that I planned for myself. And I mean, I don't know if we ever fully realize what it is that, we go to school for. But when I was a kid, I always wanted to be an astronaut or a veterinarian. And I don't know if that's common with young kids, but even to the point where up until like 5 years ago, my grandma still had a piece of paper in her purse that I wrote saying, I want to be a veterinarian when I get older. And she brought it out and showed me, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah.
I love that. I was a big journaler as a kid, and sometimes I go back and see what I wrote, and I was like, that's very interesting. If you fast forward to today, you're still having fun in your job, but a different kind of fun, I feel like. How do you think your personal journey has really led you to be in diversity, equity, and inclusion work at Spin?
Yeah, I fell into, I say really, I fell into the career, into this career path. I didn't, I guess I didn't choose it, or maybe I did, depending on how you look at it. But I worked in higher education. So I loved working with like the 18 to like 22-year-old cohort. And so I worked at two different universities before landing in corporate America and happened to land on a recruiting and diversity team. So I worked at UNLV in Las Vegas. That's also where I went to school. And then I worked at ASU and Arizona State University. And I just loved like working with honor students and like trying to help students shape their career, which at the time, like, here I am, I was like in my 30s and like, what did I even actually know about shaping your career? But I was like giving everybody the best advice I thought possible on how to do that. And then my husband and I moved out to the East Coast like almost 12 years ago. And I couldn't find a job in higher ed, like nowhere. And plus nobody ever leaves those jobs because they're wonderful, wonderful jobs. So I got a job at American Express. I started on the executive recruitment team, and then my mind was like spinning because I just moved. I'd never lived on the East Coast. I was definitely West Coast boy, and I was like, what is this place? What's happening? Everything's moving so fast. So I was not performing very well at my job. And they were very nice to me at American Express. And they were like, okay, you have two options. Like one, like, you won't be employed anymore, or two, we have this other role for you. I was like, well, I need a job. So went to the other team, and the team happened to be the global diversity and inclusion team. And then that's just where I was like, oh my God. Like I had so many realizations that, like, as a gay man, like, so I'm a part of a marginalized, community, but I wasn't making the connections, and I wasn't like fully even understanding like, my own presence and my own identities, and this being in this work like really helped me do that. And since then, it's just been like I love it, and that's where my career started. Just kind of like either you're employed or you're not, and I wanted to be employed, and it happened to be on a D&I team. And 12 years later, I'm still in the space.
Fast forward 12 years later, and you're still loving the work, have enthusiasm for it, and really making a difference. And since then, you've led a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at a lot of different organizations, and have created really great sustainable, using that word intentionally, programs. Change doesn't happen overnight, so you have to have that really solid foundation. For folks who are listening, can you give us an example of one of those programs that you helped build from scratch, including the goals and how and why you started it?
Yeah. So one of the things that allowed me to be able to do, like, to start something from scratch or to launch something, from its inception, was the foundation that I learned when working at my first corporate job at American Express. Because lots of structure and really mitigating risk. And at the time I was like, oh my God, this is like, let me breathe. But now that I've been in startup world since then, that structure is actually what has that I refer to all the time when I build programs and when I help launch things or when I lead the launch of things, because there's got to be structure, there has to be guidelines, there has to be, roles and responsibilities and alignment to over, that's also such a corporate word, but it just has to be right, all lined up to the business goals. And I remember when I first launched ERGs at my company, at the company I left after American Express, and then the company after that as well, was when I used the word structure, it was like, oh, we don't do that here. We're a startup, like it's got to be fun and like we fly by the seat of our pants, which we still do and still did, but I wasn't going to be able to get buy-in from who I needed to get buy-in unless there were structure and guidelines. So a couple of, like, one of the thing that I'm really proud of that I would call it a bit of my legacy that I left at, the last couple of organizations, was employee resource groups and helping to launch those actually even helping to, what I did was take the grassroots efforts that were already there, right? Because ERGs have to be employee driven and open to all employees. And so I came in and really just put the guardrails around, like, this is what you can actually do. Or it also be like, this is actually what an employee resource group is versus what you're doing now. And so my advice to people that, want to start ERGs at their company, or they're looking for some help, then I'm like, well, you got to put some structure in place. Like, I still can't believe that actually comes out of my mouth, but that's always my first advice, because from there you can actually still be really creative and allow employees to flourish, even if they have, certain roles and responsibilities and non-negotiables that they have to follow.
Absolutely. And I think structure also benefits, as a former employee resource group leader myself as well, just making sure there's a process, you feel supported, you feel like there's guidance, executive sponsors, charters, goals, and also compensation and celebration as leaders as well. So I think that's also really important. So love employee resource groups, building out those programs and really supporting grassroots efforts of employees. Speaking of the role of ERGs as well, I would love to know, what is, in your mind, the unique role of private employers to really create more equity in the world, knowing that I know I talked to a lot of leaders who are really passionate about the space. And I love that we know that we're not going to solve racism or sexism, homophobia in work, but that's not an excuse to say, these are microcosms of society. What can we do? Set up those non-negotiables and create more equity. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I feel like we could spend a whole year talking about that topic in particular, right? And because, maybe 3 years ago, maybe even, 5 years ago, it was obviously as humans, we're impacted by what happens to us socially. And we can't just turn it off when we come into when we physically go into our office or when we turn on the Zoom. It's you can't just step away from that. You can try and to compartmentalize those things, but we're not at a place anymore where we're doing that, or where we're encouraging people to do that. Because if you encourage people to do that, you're actually telling them to, like, not show up fully as themselves, and that's the last thing that we want to do. So I think I believe that my role in particular, and then an organization's role in particular, and then, the board or the president or the CEO's role is to be socially responsible and to take a stand when it's difficult, most difficult, and not just, and do whatever you can internally to set up policies and have spaces created that allow you to not necessarily be reactionary to when things happen, but being proactive. And I know that's hard to do because we can't predict what's going to happen. We can't predict the next natural disaster or whatever. So on some levels, we will be reactionary to those things, but it's so important to find that balance. I think, for example, I don't think it's not the sole responsibility of the person that's leading DEI, because that's like, it's impossible to expect one or two or three people to carry that burden for an entire organization. Inclusion is everybody's responsibility. It's every single last person's responsibility at an organization. Do I help facilitate and lead and bring programming and bring in different perspectives and influence policies? Yes, absolutely. That's what my team does. But once we begin to do that, and over time, as minds sort of shift and we begin to kind of speak similar language within an organization on how we feel about those things, then really people feel more empowered to take ownership of building an inclusive culture. So I feel like a very long-winded response to your question, but yes, organizations have a responsibility to be socially aware and take a stance, but then also, the leaders within the organization must also do that same exact thing.
Absolutely. Everybody does have a role to play in inclusion. It's not Ryan, one team, one person's responsibility to make sure that an organization is equitable. That is not the goal of this work at all. And I know, each person and leader is at a different part of their equity journey, and that compiles into an organization. You have to acknowledge where you are in order to do the work, internal work with a capital W. Tell me about where SPIN is today in the equity journey and where you would like to be aspirationally, let's say a year from now.
Yeah, we're still on, I feel like a new journey, and we've, taken big leaps, and then we've kind of gone down the hill a little bit. And I think that's, for me, in my experience anyway, in the past 12 years, like that's natural. We see that because, again, we can't predict what's happening in the world, right? And that influences so much, I think, the work that we do. So, at SPIN, we've got employee resource groups, for example. We have 6 of them, and we have a couple more that are trying to creep their way in, which is really great. So again, ERGs are there to, they're a vehicle for inclusion, without a doubt, within an organization, and they really help create those brave spaces in an organization to have conversations. So we're there. We have inclusion surveys, and internal inclusion, culture and inclusion survey that we do. We run ENPS surveys as well. So really trying to gather as much data as possible, not only demographic data, but the voice of employees. I mean, that's obviously important to have to combine the two and be able to tell the complete story. I always want to know, what are the most marginalized in the workplace feeling and thinking, and are they able to thrive just as much as the privileged are in an organization. We're working on some inclusion practices that are directly tied to recruiting. So how do we break that system and start over? We have a really good talent program in my maybe biased opinion, but we can always be better. And I think that's one of the things that me and my counterparts, the other people on the senior people team, are always auditing each other and asking each other, are we being inclusive, or are we being, is this really having the impact that we want to the rest of the culture? So we've got things moving and grooving. I think one of the good things too is, I was the first person hired at SPIN. I've been here for just over a year to lead diversity, and literally within 2 hours of my day one onboarding with the chief people officer, he was like, "Okay, so who else are you hiring?" I was like, "What?" He was like, yeah, you need to hire somebody. You have headcount for one more person. I'm like, I haven't even finished one sentence yet. Okay, I'm going to hire somebody. Cool. So I think, that also signals something really cool when you have, within 2 weeks, our organization went from 0 people leading diversity and inclusion to 2. And we've been able to do, we want to do more. I think Andre, who's on my team, and I are never satisfied. I think a year from now, what we would really like to see is fully operational, 6 operational employee resource groups, and they have budget. Again, that's another thing too. I just said, well, I need ERGs to have budget, and I need them to get paid. And he was like, okay, how much? And I was like, well, am I being punked? What's Like what's happening? So I feel like we're in a good place. We could be better. Spin is going, like I mentioned to you at the, before we started this conversation, like Spin is going through some transitions. We were just acquired. So we've got like all of that, transition and implementation happening. And, it causes fear in some employees, even new employees and employees that have been here for a while. So we're really trying to balance all of that right now under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. A year from now, like I said, I'd love some fully functioning, ready to go, high impact programming from our ERGs. We're running an anti-racism audit at the end of this year, which is super exciting. I don't know if those two words should go together, but exciting in the sense of like, we're having a consultant come in and is going to like really help us see like where we're racist, where we're anti-racist in our policies, and talking to employees. And then so we're going to get that assessment at the end of the year. And so I would love us at this point next year to also have taken a lot of those learnings and have broken down the systems that we have in place to fully make them anti-racist.
Yeah, it sounds like there is a lot going on, a lot to be excited about as well. And I think that support from leadership is also really important in that this is full-time work. You need to be supported with budget, with people, and again, that authentic commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, being an anti-racist organization. You mentioned a lot of kind of big questions to ask ourselves and consistently audit kind of each other as well, coming in with those curiosity-based questions. And we know this is something that a lot of folks have been doing over the past few years with the employee experience. Business as usual is definitely out the window for sure. Can you tell me about how you've redesigned a system to be more equitable? And this can be a process, policy, or initiative.
Yeah, well, I keep saying like ERGs because, sometimes it's in going back to like putting structure around them. I think that is a way that makes it equitable, right? Because before I've come into organizations, they weren't necessarily equitable. It was like kind of like the ones that had the bigger voice were the ones that were getting more of the money or more of the budget and more of the visibility across the organization. And so, I have this like 10 or 12 page ERG guidelines, employee resource group guidelines that every single ERG has to follow, right? It's kind of a non-negotiable. We do play around sometimes with budget depending on the size of your ERG, because again, we have to be equitable there too, right? And making sure that we're allocating resources fairly across the board. And and I would say another thing at my last organization is we had never really looked at our LGBTQ plus benefits and like, do we even have them? And if we do have them, like, why aren't we talking about them? And so we did an audit with the Human Rights Campaign, their corporate equality index, which I love to be able to, they come in and it's pretty comprehensive. If you haven't been through it before, it's like, it required like a team of like 7 people for us to really go through and answer the questions and be thorough. And then also like take a step back and be like, oh my God, we have so much work to do, but this is great, right? So we did that, but because we were able to do that, we found out stuff within our own benefits that we didn't even know that we were actually supporting. We just didn't know. And so we were able to now talk about that openly and freely, which we should have done before, but now it's like, okay, we know. And it also helped us influence some of our code of conduct. We didn't have all of the right, it wasn't gender, the language needed to be fixed from a gender perspective and identity perspective. So, we were able to make some quick changes there. And, for some people, that's not the flashy, like the sexy, like D&I thing that's front and center, but, some of those things aren't what employees need or want to feel like they belong. They need to know that like their benefits are inclusive, because not only and they may not even be an employee that accesses those benefits, but it's a friend, it's a colleague, it's a future, future employee that might be LGBTQ, for example, or, transgender and wanting to, and is transitioning and but is also looking for a job. And like this person that knows that their benefits are here can speak to that person about that. So it goes back to that other thing of like, truly being inclusive is not just kind of what you see all the time, right? There's so much behind the scenes and with policies and procedures that have just as much impact on an employee's well-being than, like a super high impact event.
Absolutely, especially healthcare benefits as well. And I know we talk about family form benefits so much too. And I think having that specific one, something that you're working on 365 days a year as well, to make sure that employees are seen, heard, and understood is really important. I know we talked about briefly earlier as well. You can't check our kind of lived experiences, what is happening in the world, many things from how we when and how we show up at work. And someone asked this question at a conference, and I really love it in terms of its really specificity around how it's been not perpetuating trauma that happens externally in the world, internally at the organization.
Yeah, it's something that I think about every day, and it's actually something that my colleague and I talk about all the time too, because we both identify within the LGBTQ community. And my colleague is neurodivergent, and he's Black as well. And so we're always talking about this. And my husband is Black from West Africa. So I'm able to tap into all of these things and think okay, I've got to as a oftentimes, straight presenting privileged white man, I have to make sure that I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious of using that privilege also in the workplace to the advantage to uplift others. That's really my goal, and my hope and my motivation is that I'm able to do that. And one of the ways to do that is to not perpetuate trauma in the workplace. And so I understand. So I'm okay, this is what I'm good at. This is here's where I'm good at. Where I'm not good at is maybe I'm going to need some extra voices here. And so creating, we with our ERGs, we try to set them up with success to also create those brave spaces where if something traumatic has happened in the world, how can we help to combat that from entering into the workplace as much as possible by creating these spaces where employees feel yes, this just happened to my community, but I actually want to go show up on Zoom at my organization because they've created this space for me to be able to heal. And so I think being able to also tap into my network of experts, for example, kind of what I spoke about earlier is we had the anti-racism expert that comes in is also a licensed psychotherapist. So we've done some exercises around healing racial trauma in the workplace, which is still very new, having those types of conversations in the workplace, and but doing it without igniting or reigniting trauma. It's educating people on what trauma is, what is racial trauma, what is generational trauma, what does that look like, feel like to individuals, so that they know, right, and they can begin to be educated and aware on the language to use to have conversations with their teams, but then also creating the spaces for those that are directly impacted by the trauma. And so putting those things, putting some of those workshops in place, learning opportunities in place, I have found in my last two organizations to be really valuable and I've seen it show up in how people communicate in Slack, for example, or in how people begin their team meetings after something, traumatic in the world has happened. And again, you and I, what you mentioned earlier too, is yes, you bring in and have somebody have these really powerful conversations, but it doesn't mean that the next day it's okay, and now everyone is trauma-free and now everyone knows exactly how to have the conversation.
Right.
It's a journey. It's just like allyship, right? Allyship is not something you do on Tuesday and then maybe on Friday. It's every single day. And so, but it takes time.
Right. It definitely takes time and also intention behind it. It's a long-term kind of investment as well. I love how you brought up subject matter experts, people who are licensed in the field as well. And that education piece too. So you have common language around what you're talking about, what the goal is, and creating those brave spaces for folks to engage into. I think a lot of times in this work as well, people want to know, how do we know that we're doing a good job? How do we know that we are measuring the progress? Is it the number of brave spaces that we create? Is it the programming around employee resource groups? Is it all of these things? And belonging is something that is super dynamic, and we're not looking to check the box here at all. Like you said, it's a journey. So it's not like next year we're going to say, okay, we're an equitable workplace, so you don't have to work on it in 2023 or 2024. But what is your philosophy around measuring the progress of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, knowing that what gets measured gets invested in and those things?
Yeah, it's so important for a variety of things. One, right, to measure the success, to be able to hold, me accountable and my colleagues accountable for the work that we're doing, to be able to hold, ERGs accountable for the work that they're doing, to be able to hold the organization accountable for, leaders for putting, money and investing behind diversity, equity, inclusion. So there's that. But then it's also measuring data and having the employees have another place to be able to share their voice is what's important there too, because I may know what programming has worked in the past, what initiatives have worked in the past to for sponsorship for let's say women in the workplace sponsorship program may have worked at my last two organizations, and I might be like, you know what, I'm just going to drop it in right here without even hearing or talking to what women at the organization want, and it'll probably fail. And so not only do we want to measure for like what programs are already in place to make sure that they can continue to be sustainable and high impact, but also we need to get data before we even launch a program to make sure that we're actually launching a program that is going to have the impact that we think it's going to have across the organization. And then being able to like have the reporting at the end of the year or have the reporting mid-year. This isn't about, for me, it's not about like saying that we have, this many women and this many men and this many Black women and this many Black men at the organization and like splashing that on like an infographic and putting it out there. I personally don't like to do that. I understand the impact of that, right? Because we do want to tell a complete story, but we also have to make sure that like, if we're going to talk about this stuff externally, that internally we're in a good place first, so we're not sort of putting like smoke and mirrors out there. But we can't do any of that without having some measurable data. We need to have the voice. I need to hear what, for example, Black transgender women are feeling and thinking at the organization. But we also have to have that data point too, because I have to be able to meet leaders where they are, right? Not every leader wants to hear the anecdotal stuff. They want to know, like, I need to know how many women are at this organization. I need to know how many women we've promoted. I need to know how many women have left the company. I need to know how many women are VPs. I need, as an example. And then I come in and be like, well, this is why we're seeing a decline, is because women are saying this when they leave the organization. So the data kind of has to come from so many different directions in order for me and the team and the people team to be really successful in the work that we do.
Absolutely. It's an alignment. It's really balancing kind of the different initiatives and indicators that you need to show as well in order to do this work. I know we are going to be in June 2022 soon. Yay for us, making it year by year. How has been honoring and celebrating Pride this year, recognizing that, we just talked about that this is something that you're doing and celebrating and honoring employees and supporting LGBTQ plus employees 365 days a year, but definitely want to ask around June as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously close to my heart. So it's like one of my favorite times of the years to celebrate Pride. And we have actually our Pride ERG went through transition at the end of last year. We have two new co-leads, and they actually just started like a month ago, and they've already planned the Pride month, which is like super cool. But we're doing things where we highlight internal LGBTQ employees through our Slack platform. We have like an informal chat that we do. We'll do that once a week. We're also looking at the intersectionality of Pride, and realizing that it was Black transgender women that really helped us get to where we are today. So, and Juneteenth falls within Pride Month. So we're going to have a conversation that talks about both of those. But we also want to celebrate, and the joy and of being gay. And so at the end of the month, there's an organization that I can't remember the name. It's based in San Francisco because that's kind of where our company is based. And so we're going to have a hybrid happy hour where we have a couple drag queens come in and perform, but then have the opportunity for friendship and companionship as well. But the main thing out of all of this is, I always push my ERG leads. It's like, when it's your month, your Heritage History Month that you want to anchor your work on, anchor it. But then what are we doing in that month Now talk about it in July. How does it weave through into August, into September, into October? And so they've really thought about some intentional programming around that too. And they're actually working with the anti-racist consultant, and she's going to do some work specifically around identities, queer, transgender identities, and do a workshop around that too. So we've got a lot of great, impactful, and maybe even uncomfortable conversations that'll come out of that for some people. But I'm really, really looking forward to it.
That's really exciting, and also appreciate that intersectional piece as well. We know that is so important, and continue the conversation, year round as well. Ryan, we talked about a lot. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscoring any key takeaways about anything we discussed?
I mean, I'm sad that the conversation is coming to an end. First of all, I love it. I love engaging in this conversation, and from a perspective of like also learning from you as well. That's why I like, and so thank you for the questions. They're actually been making me like check myself and be like, whoa, I need to get back into doing that. Like Christina's really coming at me here with these good questions. But one of the things that I would say too is that to anybody that wants to get started in this work, like it's so engaging, and show up as how you want to show up. I try to like jump out of Zoom to show my passion sometimes, because I'm really passionate about it, but you don't have to be that way about it to really get the work done. And to also understand that, like, even if you are somebody who's marginalized that is leading DEI, or and I consider myself marginalized, but like I mentioned earlier, with a ton of privilege, like also understand like what my role as an ally plays in all of this work. And I always reinforce that in my mind. I may not be the best ally also to my own community. So I still learn, and I'm still learning. And I always tell people, like, understand that foundation of, I think for me, for DEI is really, a lot of it is rooted in allyship, and understanding that like it's hard work, it's challenging work. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, but be genuine, obviously, in the work that you do, so that the communities that you are working with and that you are trying to ally yourselves with, they see that genuineness in you. And then they'll check you when you make mistakes, and hold yourself accountable for that. Don't bounce around it, and then just continue to do the work.
Yes, continue to do the work, show up in the ways that you can as well. And everybody's on a continuous learning journey. Nobody has all of the answers. That would be absolutely impossible, but there are things you can do today, tomorrow, and the next day to always do better. Ryan, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to having a conversation with you again, hopefully soon, about this same topic.
Yes, absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.